I put this number 3 back in here because it didn't come out that way in my report. It's just exactly what the motion was.
Keeps people coming to the meetings.
Yeah.
Carol, is Peter watching?
That's nice.
Not there yet.
This looks official.
Oh, Mr. Watts, can you hear us okay?
I can.
Thank you, sir. Oh, how many minutes we got? Oh, I noticed someone out there for his cover.
Yeah,
You're fine. We're already right. I'll probably have to bring out some more chairs as well, depending on who comes in. Okay. All right, quiz time. Okay. Speed trailer was out on Cottage for 22 days. I just took it off today. How many cars, both ways, because it counts in both ways, and speeds both ways. How many cars passed by that sign in 22 days?
60,000.
3,000, 60,000. Well, you've heard it before. 18,607. Wow. Okay.
Is that the sign, the speed limit? No, that's skewed because of the location.
Why?
Because people going that way are coming to the end of the road and they're going to be slowing down. People coming the other way, they turn onto the, and then they're not hitting speed.
It picks them up and registers them about 1,000 feet. Oh, maybe not that far, but like way back. So it goes a lot farther.
Yeah, I come out at 3rd and I came out too quick. And it started.
Yeah, so it goes back pretty far.
Don't you think if we're in the middle, halfway between, they could get a whole different number? Not number passing, but
the only difference would be the streets that are numbered, that people going in and out, maybe that didn't quite hit the sign, but otherwise it tracks in both ways. Like for example, I had it on Pacific Way that it tracked 60,000 cars for a period of 31 days.
No, I'm not talking about the number of cars, I'm talking about the speed.
Oh, yeah, it monitors them for their top speed. So as they're going away, even 400, 500 feet passing, it's still monitoring. And it registers the top.
Wow.
Of which? What was the top speed?
I take back my argument.
Top speed.
Top speed.
53.
45.
79.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. That's a record for Gerhard. I think we had 91.
Blizzard so
It was 70 miles an hour that way and 79 that was the record. Sometimes when you put these signs out, it's like, yeah, game on. Okay, now this is the view. What was the average speed for those 18,607 cars?
23 miles an hour.
How?
23.
what's the speed limit?
25.
27. 29.
38.
35.
24.66.
Oh.
So 1.48% were of 35 and above. And that's 275 cars out of 18,000. That was 35.
One day.
No.
Oh, no, wait, it's
22 days.
22.
So everybody, most people.
Meeting time. Sorry, it's true.
Okay, thank you for the update. I'm calling this meeting to order for the what day this is. August 11th. Yes. And so first order of business, I'm reading a disclosure statement that gets read at every one of these meetings.
Oh, I'm sorry, if you don't, you can wait till you get here if you want. You always say.
Well,
Okay.
Ginny always reads it right out.
In
the
case
get-go, I
everybody's
think.
not here, but that's,
Does she not?
you're right, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, open the hearing, read the hearing disclosure statement. Here we go. And thanks again, Kurt.
Had I known, I wouldn't have.
All persons testifying shall be deemed parties to the application and must provide their name and full mailing address if they wish to be notified of the decision, continuances, appeals, or other procedural actions required by the code. The city zoning code specifies applicable criteria to be relied on in making a decision. Those criteria and findings of fact are in the city staff report. Public testimony should be limited to those criteria and findings of fact or to other city or state land use standards that the person testifying believes apply to the proposed land use action. Failure to raise an issue in person or in writing with sufficient detail to afford the hearing body and parties to the hearing an opportunity to respond to that issue precludes appeal to the city council or land use board of appeals, or to seek damages in circuit court due to a condition of approval. Before the conclusion of the initial and evidentiary hearing, any participant may ask the Planning Commission for an opportunity to present additional relevant evidence, arguments, or testimony that is within the scope of the hearing. The hearing's body shall grant the request by scheduling a date to finish the hearing, a continuance, to a time and date certain, or by leaving the record open for additional evidence. Okay. Do any of the commissioners have any conflict of interest for what's going on here tonight?
On the two hearings.
No. Yeah, read these hearings, yeah. In the audience, is there anyone who feels like any of the commissioners don't have an ability to make an impartial decision? Now we go to staff report. No, let's see. Yeah, staff report. Or no, we missed the minutes. Okay, I'm backing up a little bit because we need to, in the consent agenda, before we approve the minutes, we need to modify the minutes of July 14th. And I don't know if you have your minutes in front of you or not. This modification came to me via Carol.
And they all have it.
And you guys all have it. Have you all seen this and understand what it pertains to? It's revisions to draft notice of decision of draft notices of decision. It's dated today, but it's specific to the July 14th meeting and the July 14th minutes. Everybody's got that from?
Yes.
Okay, so you all have it in front of you and you are able to read it. So just understand that will be inserted if you go to page 13 in the minutes, or not in the minutes, but in last month's. Is it last month or this month?
This month.
Okay, you go into this month's
draft notice of decision for Cutler. By the way, this is the Cutler decision that was made in the motion. You remember it was condition number 3. It was.
So we go to the 8-4, but Carol gave us 8-4-22, and it's the document that we will use today with all the new red marking. So we are changing, we're changing item number 3 to to read the paperwork you have in front of you will replace what's number 3 on page 13. In the decision. Roman numeral 4 is, all cap decision, and it's replacing number 3.
I must say I'm a little bit confused.
Yeah.
I'm on page 13.
Page 13 of this month.
Yes.
Today's, yeah.
And go down to number 3.
So
Condition
that
number
was
3.
one sentence number 3. It's replaced by.
Yes,
This text.
because it's incomplete. Because as you know, you required what's stated. All of this is stated in that paragraph, and all it says right now in this draft is that the existing road and utilities which shall be rewritten to service the new properties. That was the end of one of the elements that was added.
Right.
As was, what else did you add? You add the applicant's cost. And
I mean, we'll probably come back to this
will
later, but I just want to get the minutes approved with this in the minutes.
Does that make sense to you all?
So you guys understand what we're doing?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you all know where we are with this additional information, that goes into the area we talked about.
July 14th minutes.
So that becomes what we deal with today. But now back to our agenda, we need to have an approval of the modified minutes of July 14th and July 9th.
So moved.
Second? Anybody second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Okay, so now we have the minutes.
Who seconded? Did you get that?
Judy.
Yeah.
Judy, second.
Okay, thank you.
And the financial report, I guess, does anybody have any information they want to talk about the financial report? If not, we'll move on. Any correspondence? It's not part of tonight's meeting. Okay. Done with consent agenda, staff report.
I don't have anything to report tonight. Angelina?
There's been the ELKS plan entered into all of your packets. I brought them over tonight, however, Chad wanted everybody to go through it and just decide on some key subjects that they maybe might want to go over next week.
If the meeting is the works for the next meeting, as soon as it can get on the agenda. Go ahead.
Well, I just had a quick question about that. Where's Gerhardt Glen?
Where's what?
Gerhardt Glen.
The reference to it in the ELK plan.
I don't remember.
Huh.
I'll figure that out as well.
Okay, it's in the ELK thing.
Yeah, Gerhard Glenn. Good to know. Okay.
Okay, so any more staff? Anything to put in tonight, Chad?
Nothing for me at this time. Not with this agenda.
Okay. Then we have to excuse an absence. I'm requesting that we excuse Jenny's absence for tonight.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Jenny's been excused, and I disagree with your decision. Thank you very much.
Which one of you is, which one is your second?
Sure. Second.
Oh.
So the goals list.
Well, we added the elk management plan to the list, and that's why we included it in your packet. And that's all that's new.
Okay.
So it's on there, and it's a priority. You guys see that in front of you?
Priority 1.
Priority 1. Unless you want to move it somewhere else, but that's where we put it, and that's where we will spend some time deciding, what to do with this in the near future. Okay, So if anybody has any other additions to the goals, or any subtractions, suggestions?
Okay, we will continue on. Are there any visitor comments not related to tonight's agenda? Not seeing any, we'll move forward. So now we're into the public hearing. So we're reopening the public hearing for number 22-04P HHB partition application, Cutler Lane. An application for approval of tentative land partition to divide one parcel into three on a parcel located on a private street named Cutler Lane on medium density residential R2 zone. So this is, we're coming back to this obviously from what we did last month and maybe prior to that. So I'm not sure what we're doing at this point.
So Chair, in addition to opening the hearing, we'd also want to open the record in order to clarify that the correspondence that has been received between the last hearing and this hearing will be added into the record.
Good.
I recall.
And you're not only reopening it, but you're reopening the record.
Oh, reopening the record.
So that anything that occurs tonight is now added to the record.
Any correspondence that we have received between the last hearing and this hearing would also be allowed into the record.
Okay. So as stated by Peter, we will, that is completing my definition of what we're doing tonight.
First item.
On copper.
Okay. Would you like me to proceed?
Well, please.
Okay, thank you. So the new addition tonight to the record is a letter dated August 10th from Abigail Germain, representing Brian Evans. And you should have all received it earlier today by email. Everybody had a chance to take a look at that? Okay. And so I will try and explain why this is back to you in short, because we do have what normally happens after your hearings and you make a decision, the staff goes back and writes it up in a formal order. And that's what this is, but it says draft order. And because more information was received after the meeting and or that was inclusive of your first hearing in June. So you had a hearing in June, things were said, and then you continued it until July. And then you made a decision and you closed the hearing. So tonight we're reopening it for the purpose of adding some new information to help you understand it and to clarify some things. It's really for clarity and completeness to your decision. Now, this is unusual to do it this way, but in all fairness, the new information is worth considering. Okay, and unless you object and say you don't want to do this, and just let it go the way you left it last month, you could also do that. So,
at what point is it appropriate for us to discuss this process issue, whether we should reopen?
Well, it seems like this is the time to discuss whether to reopen. I mean, I've opened it, I've reopened that, but if the consensus of the Planning Commission is that we don't want to reopen it, then we should decide that now.
May I?
Sure.
So the only reason I'm raising this issue is I'm not opposed to reopening it to clarify further information. We have a legal challenge on reopening it in the attorney's letter to us. And I think we need a reading from our attorney as to whether it's appropriate to reopen it, given what's been stated by Ms. Germain.
Okay, and
sure. Well, you know, in order to consider the comments that Ms. Germain made in her letter, we would have to reopen the hearing and allow that into evidence because both the record and the hearing have been closed. So I think that the way that I would frame this is, you know, there are two kind of paths forward. There's been a lot of confusion about this application in my mind about whether a road existed, about whether right-of-way existed, as to what people had agreed upon and how that was recorded, as well as actions by a former city manager. The general rule in Oregon is that a former council can't bind a future council. So there are ways that the city could accept a road, such as a non-remonstrance agreement or something of that nature, but just a blanket statement of, if this happens, then you're going to provide this without that sort of agreement, I think would be very unusual. The question that was posed to me originally was that, is there a road? And if you look at the plat, there's a road and utility easement that are both platted. So I did not have full information at that time regarding all these other ancillary issues. Those have come to light after this. The steps you could take today would be to reconfirm what you had decided, and then the entire record of the proceeding would likely be appealed to the council. I think both parties have stated they want to appeal or are interested in appealing. The other thing would be to see if, based on all this new information, you want to revisit that decision, and hopefully that maybe that decision that you come to would be more palatable to the parties and they wouldn't want to appeal. So in my mind, you know, my advice would be, you know, a commission or a council should try and get things right if they can. I think if you were to come to a different conclusion, there is that process appeal that's on the books, though frankly, given that we've accepted her letter into the record, and given that this is not a final decision that would go to LUBA, everybody gets another bite at the apple in front of the city council. I don't see a whole lot of harm in hearing the new information and making a decision based on that. Though if council wants to make an objection at this time, I think she should. And that goes for the other council as well. We've got 3 lawyers on the call. So,
Mr. Chair, commissioners.
Yes, and you, from my last meeting, you represent Evans, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Abigail Germain with Elam & Burke on behalf of Brian Evans and EPI Properties, 251 East Front Street, Boise, Idaho, 83701. I certainly understand the city attorney's comments related to the fact that, well, I've posed a letter to the commission, so if the letter wants to be considered, then we need to reopen the record. However, that letter was mostly in response to the fact that we received additional information in that draft final findings and order that was not consistent with what had been decided by the commission. And so I felt that it was necessary to illustrate concerns of that and bring to the commission's attention that at this point, we don't have a final order that reflects the commission's decision and the conditions they required to be in that final order. And that until we have that, there's no ability for either party to appeal that. And there also isn't a mechanism just to have the matter completely reheard. So, I understand council's recommendations there, but we're somewhat in a catch-22 in the sense that we've had something done that is not consistent with what was ordered by the commission. Thank you.
Oh, yes. So Peter, do you have a response to what Abigail just said?
Well, my guess is there were draft findings that were prepared at the last hearing. My understanding is that your decision was consistent with those. So if that's the case, then your decision is the same as it was last time. You could instruct staff to draft findings consistent with the last decision, and that would get a final decision that then the parties could or could not appeal to City Council. So I think there are multiple ways we could cure this. And Christian, I don't know if you have thoughts on this as well.
I do, thanks.
Please identify yourself.
Sure, Christian Zupancic, 615 Broadway Street, Suite 216, Seaside, Oregon, 97138. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, that's Heritage Homes. So I'm his attorney and I'm Heritage Homes attorney and speaking on their behalf today. So I think it is appropriate to reopen this hearing. There is no law or ordinance that actually prevents it. And in fact, it looks like we've already started accepting evidence and other items into the record. We don't have a final order, as Mr. Main illustrated. There's nothing to appeal. So until we get a final written order, there's really, it's not over yet. In other words, because there's nothing for us to actually appeal. And also, there is a statute that contemplates a reopening of evidence and reopening of the hearing. That's ORS 197.763. So it is possible to get the hearing reopened. And in this case, I agree with Peter Watts that there are good reasons for reopening this and reconsidering some of the conditions that were there on the first outset. And once I have an opportunity, once it's appropriate for me to do so, I'd like to make further comments about what Mr. Main has said, and then some of the conditions that were discussed in that previous hearing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I think, now, John, you mentioned, you brought up this question, how do the rest of you feel? Do you have additional things to bring to the table tonight that would warrant reopening? I think that's an appropriate question. I don't know if I'm out of order, but that's what seems to make sense to me.
So if we don't reopen, it becomes final and goes to the City Council, and then we drop it in their lap, and then they can sort out all the issues that we're supposed to deal with tonight.
Well, yeah, theoretically it would, unless it wouldn't go to City Council unless one of the applicants said,
so, fourth down and punch.
We disagree. I guess the question really is whether we have additional information that's going to change what we did a month ago. That's where I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just asking what everybody feels. So go ahead.
Well, I always feel like I'm like way behind the 8 ball in my role here, but I'm getting there. If I read this accurately, the last time, and I wasn't at that meeting, so I didn't hear all the discussion, we required dedicating the road. Is that right? Did I read that right? And what I understand from the lawyer's information, we don't have the authority to require that.
Which lawyer? Our city lawyer.
Correct.
Thank you.
Peter Watts. And so to me, that seems like important information to force us to reconsider what we did last time. That's where I sit. I don't know how the rest of you feel about that.
Well, I tend to agree, because we based our decision on apparently is wrong. Okay. And I think we need to undo that and send a good package to the City Council.
Sure. Okay. Well, that's appropriate.
I agree also, and there's questions that Terry sent to Peter that I would love to have answered. He sent 5 questions to him, some of which
like number 3, I wasn't even clear about what that meant. Terry also brought up the idea of declaratory relief action. I'd love, some comments from Peter on that. And then this information on the ruling by the Planning Commission back in 2005. I think we need to take that into consideration.
Okay. Was that all the things you had questions on? Don?
I feel with the new information we should be open.
Okay. And John, what do you think after?
Yeah, I think that Peter clarified that he feels we have the authority to reopen. I was just determining that in my question.
Gotcha. Okay, well then, maybe the first thing to do, so I suggest we reopen, but I think Sharon's suggestion was appropriate pertaining to Terry's questions, which were spot on in most cases. And so Peter, do you have the email or Gmail from Terry Graff? Do you?
I do.
Carol, you were CC.
I can run through these questions one at a time.
Before we do that, I want to just step back one step to talk about when we're dealing with exactions, and that's what we're dealing with, kind of what we can do and what we can't do. And then some best practices, and this kind of incorporates his questions. So there are 2 tests when they're exactions, and if you're going to require somebody to pave something that's a road, that will be an exaction. So there has to be a nexus between what they're asking to do, which would be 3 partitions to build houses, and then the exaction has to be roughly proportionate to the benefit received. So the nexus would be that more houses add more trip counts, more trip counts on gravel versus asphalt do create some issues. And that is a general rule under your code, when people are doing partitions, they are required to pave that road right away. And then as far as is it roughly proportionate? Yeah, this is not unusual to do. For the portions of the road that are in front of these 3 lots, the trigger for the exaction is an application. So the adjoining property owner, because they haven't made an application to add a dwelling to their property or something like that, you can't require them to pave a road, nor can you require them to dedicate a right-of-way. And that's why in some cities you'll see lots where there'll be 1 lot that'll have a sidewalk in front of it, and then the neighboring lots on each side won't. And it's because until they file for a permit and ask for something that is large enough to trigger that kind of exaction, a city can't require them to do it. The second point, and Terry's question really gets to this, is are we required to take the road? Are we required regarding the dedication? And in my mind, the answer is no. What we're really dealing with here is technically a road because there's a road easement, but really a driveway. It's not connecting Highway 99 to another road. It's not creating a portion. It's not creating, new ways for people to get around from one part of the city to the other. And from a just public policy standpoint, what we're talking about is a partially paved driveway. And if we were to accept that, we don't have a road that's been brought up to city standards because there's not an insignificant portion of it that's gravel. And we would be responsible for the maintenance for part of that road, the paved part, but it's just an orphaned piece of pavement, really. So if at some point in the future we were interested in getting that road, which would mean maintaining it. And it really only benefits the properties that are on it. We could ask for something like a non-remonstrance agreement, saying that they wouldn't object to turning it over or giving us a dedication deed at some point in the future. That's how we could get at that if that's something that we wanted. But as far as requiring the dedication, we probably could for the applicant, but we certainly could not for the neighboring landowner. And as I look at the city code section that seems to require that dedication, I believe it's for scenarios where you have a road that's stubbed out, then a lot is created, which would allow the exaction for that pavement to be extended. And that's how you would get connectivity between streets. Probably not this sort of scenario. So I think it's within your purview as a council to say, no, we don't do that. As far as whether they could bind you in 2005, you as a planning commission, no, they can't. They could have bound the applicant by having a non-remonstrance agreement or something like that, but they don't seem to have. And even if they had, it would be up to us to decide whether to accept it or not. In Oregon, in order to transfer a road from a private party to a government, it either needs to be on a subdivision plat, it needs to be through a dedication deed, and it would need to be accepted by the city council. And there's no requirement that a city council accept a dedication deed. So our code gives us the option of saying yes, but it also gives us the option of saying no. The second question is the owner of the adjoining property, which is the easement crosses, making the argument if the PC grants the application to split the existing parcel into 3 separate parcels, the intended use of the easement to serve one parcel would be changed and the easement will become overburdened. So if you are doing an easement and you only intend to dedicate it to one house, so you wouldn't specify the easements to a parcel, you would specify it to one dwelling. I would expect to see that recorded. I actually have seen that sort of language recorded, and that is to prevent this sort of scenario. We do not, or at least in the title report that I've seen, the plot that I've seen, all of those things, there isn't that sort of language. And the parcel owner is under our code allowed to parcel these. So even if there were technical arguments that only the first of those 3 parcels would be served by this, the second and the third would be able to get what's required in what's called an easement by necessity. And that's if they can demonstrate that there's no other way to get ingress or egress to their property. They actually have to go to circuit court. The burden of proof is on them. They have to make a bunch of findings, and then they get their easement. So I'm not terribly concerned about that. I think there are multiple paths to get to serving them. The existing easement is recorded easement with a legal description that allows ingress and egress to the parcel number. If the PC grants the application, there will be 3 separate parcels with 3 separate parcel numbers. Can the existing easement as written and recorded be used for ingress, egress by the 2 newly created parcels with different parcel numbers? And again, I would argue that if they wanted to limit it to a dwelling, that's how they would do it. Whether or not a parcel was chopped into 1 parcel or 2 parcels or 3 parcels, at the time of that, I would expect to see some other language that indicated we're only going to allow you to do this for 1 dwelling. And that's that's not there. The fourth question is in his application, the applicant states that the existing easement will be extended so it can be used by the two newly created parcels for ingress egress. Can the existing easement be extended as stated? So if you look at the plat, how it's described as a road and utility easement, and it goes across the first owner's property onto the second owner and then continues. So even if there were a technical argument that that is extending it in some manner because it's going past where it was previously, because those parcels will be under common ownership, to the extent that it needed to be extended, that property owner could extend it. In my mind, it's my opinion. Both council, I'm sure, have their own opinions and are free to offer them. The fifth question is, the applicant surveyor stated the easement can be transferred to the two newly created parcels for ingress and egress. Can that be done? And yeah, I think that how this is described on the plat is a road and utility easement. And so the way, and Christian and I have dealt with utility easements before, and we don't necessarily agree on the interpretation of those, but in this case, it's both. It's both a road easement and utility easement. So in a case where it's just utility easement, you might argue it's only for utilities. In this case, it's for both, for a road and utilities. So I have not seen anything in the title report or anything on the plat that would make me think that the parcels couldn't be created. Another question has been raised since Terry's email, and that is that there seems to have been some sort of discussion of a limitation where the parties may have agreed to only do one parcel, but it was never recorded. It's not on any of the documents. We can only go off of the existing recorded documents. To the extent that there was a separate agreement between the parties and it was an enforceable agreement, that would be for the parties to decide amongst themselves and sort out amongst themselves whether a party could be sued for specific performance or something like that. I don't know, because I don't know exactly how the ownership has evolved over the years or what other representations warranties have been made in writing between the parties. I haven't seen anything. So that's kind of how my interpretation of those 5 questions. And then the 6th question of, what if there's some sort of separate verbal agreement or separate understanding between the parties? And to the extent there is, we really haven't seen it in a fashion that would allow us to take it into account.
Thank you, Peter. And you've said a lot, and I think I understand most of it, but I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying is that if this is divided into 3 parcels, that the 2 new parcels have no problem using the existing easement to get to their parcels. They would have ingress and egress by using that easement.
The road goes all the way through.
That's your
opinion. To the extent that it didn't, it's the owner of that parcel that will be able to extend it. And I don't think that owner would need to, because it looks like it goes all the way through. But to the extent that they did, I think that would probably be easily accomplished. I hope I'm right. I don't think they'd need to, but if they did, I think it could happen.
So again, you see, Tim, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but you seem to be hedging. If this is divided, the 3 parcels, the 2 new parcels would have no problem at all using the existing easement for ingress and egress. Is that what you're telling us? Yes,
that's what I'm telling you, with the caveat that in the law, nothing's ever 100% and nothing's ever 0. So someone could always bring a case, and you know, I think I've got a pretty good record, but there have been times when judges have disagreed with my legal reasoning. So I can't promise you what a judge would do or what the Land Use Board of Appeals would do if they got this. But my legal opinion is that there isn't the sort of restrictive language with the plat or anything else that would restrict it to one home. Under our code, there is enough acreage there's enough dirt to divide it into 3. And that doesn't seem unduly burdensome. And it also seems like it was already contemplated because you have a road easement running almost the entire length of the property.
If we determined that we thought it was unduly burdensome, would that be a legitimate reason to deny the application?
Well, it's allowed under the creating the parcels is allowed under your code. So I think it will be very difficult for you to deny it. I think that what can you order in the way of exactions is a more open-ended question. There was written testimony that came in today that had some concerns regarding flooding, whether or not you could address those either through a maintenance bond or something else.
That's the Park Lane partition that comes up.
Oh, is that a different one? Then that's not a concern.
So does anyone else have any questions for Peter, you know, to expand on Terry's questions or additional questions, or no?
I do, although I may be more for Carol than for Peter. If you recall last month's meeting, I don't want to speak for Don, but Don made I have an excellent point in last month's meeting that just because the council historically had not required road dedication and pavement, et cetera, in the past, you know, I think it's no time like the present, were your words.
Right.
You know, let's start doing it right now. And my vote and decision last month was largely based on that line of thinking, which is it's time for us to start doing the right thing now. But now it sounds like that is not what the code says. And so what I'm looking for, Carol, is what was the code? What was the city code portion? Or my code is the right word, but what were we working on last? What were we basing that on last month? That once a partition is requested, that there's a requirement to dedicate, requirement to pave, et cetera. Where is that language? Is that something we can still find in this packet?
It's in the subdivision ordinance.
Okay.
And it's general. It says in a partition, you know, you shall comply with the city street standards.
Okay.
Now, actually, right there, city street standards would apply to a city street, and which the same ordinance was in effect in 2005, by the way, which they did not enforce. Well, they didn't enforce it because the easement goes all the way to technically to the end of the property. The other reason is this is the dead end. I mean, this is not a through street. As Peter alluded to, this is not a kind of street where you're trying to piece together all these unimproved sections in order to get to your final plan. There's no final plan for this easement.
So what you're stating, if I get this right, Carol, is, and I think what Peter's stating is, that's the underlying intent of the statute, is to allow new parts of the town that intend to be kind of connected to other parts of the town to be properly paved, properly dedicated, and that it suggests you may want to revisit this code.
Well, there's no question about that. That's this old subdivision ordinance, probably 40, 50 years old, 40 at least.
I don't know if that's within the purview. It's
on our goals list.
Okay, let's up that to a higher level.
I know.
Okay, I think I understand. Thank you.
Go ahead. I might be asking this out of the wrong place. Are we going to get to this Gerhardt Planning Commission ruling when you go through the findings, or?
Well, number one, I'm not sure you need or want to go through the findings.
The 05 one.
Yes. If I'm kind of waiting to see how you decide how to move here. If you want to go through, normally you don't, I don't know if there's some confusion about this, but you don't write the final findings. The staff does based on your decision. We put it in an order form like this and it's signed by the chairperson. So this has come back to you for these kinds of clarifications that have come up since after you decided. In other words, you made a decision and then, as Peter said, he decided you can't require it.
I do think Sharon's referring to the 05 decision that Nedeker signed off on. And
so there's that, and that is simply a deed restriction that was stated to have been proposed in 05, but it was never recorded.
But it's in writing. I understand what you're saying. It was legally, I get that. But it's very clear on what it says. So my question is do we, as Planning Commission now, have the right to overturn what they wrote back then? Because that's what, if we don't stipulate that this has to be paved and dedicated, then aren't we overturning what they wrote?
Prior decision.
Right. But I don't mean to interrupt, but what you have in your hand, it kind of doesn't exist anymore because it never really got
enacted,
official. So it was somebody's intent at some point, but
no.
How much weight does that have?
It's the ruling of that 05 commission that they were the people that granted the partition to cut. The original, it was one big parcel. 05, they said it's now 3 parcels with the tail end of the whole dragon that is what's being discussed essentially. But
now there's 2 new owners to that land who were not in on that agreement. And ideally it would have been
it says a property owner, it doesn't say the property owner. It says if a property owner requests to develop parcels 1 or 2.
Okay, well let's let we have Mr. Evans as attorney with a response. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I just want to make sure we're referring to the same documents. And I also don't know that Mr. Watts has even had an opportunity to see these 2 documents, because based on what I'm hearing from him, it doesn't seem like he has seen those. So there's the one document which was part of the application by the original applicant in 2005, which contained the proposed deed restriction that was to be placed in the record before and recorded before the final plat was approved. In addition to that, there are also the findings by the commission in 2005 specifically stating what the conditions are to be if the plat is to be approved. Now, I certainly understand Mr. Watts' statements about, well, when we pull the title or we pull the plat, we're not seeing those necessarily on there. I agree. And that's a mistake that happened, because the tentative plat should have never been approved without those conditions in place. So I want to make sure that the commission is looking at both of those documents, because they're two separate items. And I don't know that Mr. Watts has had an opportunity to see those either, because I think that would maybe change certainly his comments related to can a prior governing board bind a future board? Well, that's certainly what we see all the time when conditions are placed on applications, CUPs, whatever it may be. So I just want to make sure that's in front of the commission.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Peter, did you get that comment? Do you have a response?
I mean, I did see those documents, and the problem is, the restriction didn't get recorded. So there is no recorded. There is nothing. Why or how that happened, I don't know. But it was 17 years ago, and what we've got is the plat that we've got in the title report that we've got. If there was some later in time reason why they didn't enforce that condition and record it anyway, I don't know. But I mean, once it's been over 10 years, basically anything would have told, I think. So
well, okay, so
I can't.
I'd like to respond to that as well, if you don't mind.
hang on, I have one more question for Peter, and then we'll come to you, sir. So here, I want to make sure that what's the status of the planning commission? I think what Sharon's suggesting, the planning commission made a ruling. I don't understand why that has to be recorded. It's a ruling within the auspices of the government of Gerhardt, and that ruling was by the planning commission in 05. It's the number, and item 3 in there addresses the paving of that road. I believe it's number 3. But so Peter, does the planning commission's paperwork from 10 years ago, 20 years ago need to be recorded to be official, or is it not a city document with some validity?
Yeah, because the future owner of the property wouldn't be going through what a planning commission decided. They would be looking at the title.
I got you. Okay.
They'd be looking at the title report. And that's why it's really important to record those to the extent that there's a limitation on what can be done. And why that condition wasn't required, we don't know, but it wasn't.
But Mr. Chairman, I would also add that in addition to that, some of these conditions would not be triggered until there was a future action by the commission. So again, I mean, I agree with Mr. Watts. This should have been somehow documented better, but it doesn't mean that those conditions are null and void in the event that they are triggered by a future application. So, I mean, to the extent that they haven't been dealt with previously, it's because we haven't had an application to do the exact thing that these conditions were put in place to direct.
I'm sorry. So our lawyer for Johnson, for the applicant, you had a comment too, sir. I forget your name.
Yeah, Christian Zupancic. Thank you.
Okay, Christian.
And first of all, I want to thank you guys for listening to 3 lawyers talk tonight. I know that's not easy, so thank you. I want to address a lot of the things that Peter brought up. We're talking a lot about, you know, the scope of this easement and the conditions that were back in 2005. There's a reason that 2005 condition cannot necessarily be enforced. And I will get to that in just a second. But when we go back to those 2 documents that Mr. Main was raising, that 2005 final decision, it actually specifically contemplated further partitioning. It's in that approval condition number 3. And it talks about, hey, if this is going to be, if this is going to be partitioned in the future, this could happen. Now, Cutler could have appealed it at that point, but he didn't. And the reason, and the fact that we can't find a deed restriction, that's also very important. I agree with Peter on that point. The reason that Cutler probably didn't file their deed restriction was because he didn't have to. I mean, I understand that he voiced that he's willing to make a concession to put a deed restriction in place, but it turns out that the Planning Commission didn't require him to do it. And why would he do it? It would only decrease the value of the property. So since he didn't do it, we have to proceed on the assumption that he didn't intend for any of that restriction to actually be in place. And this is really all that you have in front of you, is what's on the record. And I also have to agree with Peter about this separation between what's a private enforcement action and what's public. Generally speaking, a planning commission is going to be looking at ordinances, zoning. That's what they decide things on. If we're talking about the scope of the easement and whether or not, one property owner can use it or the other one, that's mostly a private right of enforcement issue. That stuff gets enforced or litigated in court. And because there's a lot of evidentiary issues there, you got to have witnesses where they're going to offer testimony and they can be cross-examined. It's just not really the venue here for us to decide You know, what was the intent of the parties back there, aside from what we have recorded, which is really nothing. We don't have any intent there. And there's kind of an interesting aspect about this, about how an easement is created in the first place. And this is kind of it's kind of an odd situation, and it just got clarified actually in 2020. The Oregon courts got into this issue, and a lot of it has to do with this idea of merger. So when Cutler owned all of this land and he put the easement on the partition plat, that easement didn't actually come into existence until he conveyed one of those parcels away. And the reason is because you can't give yourself an easement. It's called the concept of merger, right? You already have the right to cross your own land. And so the law says there is no easement until one of those pieces gets given away. And the first time, to my understanding, that one of those pieces was given away was in 2013. And if you want to look at some of the case law that discusses this, it's Partney v. Russell, 304 or App 679, starts at page 689. Again, it's a 2020 case. So here with Cutler, the easement didn't come into existence until 2013 when he first gave away that back parcel. And we don't have any evidence at all about what Cutler intended back in 2013, which is, you know, years after the 2005, especially because there was no deed restriction in place. And then a lot of the stuff that Mr. Main presented, he presented some case law about what's the scope of the easement? You know, what did the parties intend? Well, that's the key word right there, right? Parties, two of them. You got to have two parties. If it's just one person, there's no easement. Parties. So you look at the person who holds the easement and the person who's burdened by the easement, and you look at the two parties and you get evidence from the two of those folks as to what the intent of the easement was. All we have is Cutler's opinion. That's it. And under the law, that's just not enough because, again, it takes two people to tango as far as easements go. And the other part of that is, again, that the easement was not created until 2013. We don't have any evidence from then either. And I want to talk a little bit about the dedication issue too, which I know Peter raised. The city's correct that you can't impose a dedication condition on this particular application. There's a case that talks about this. It's called Brown versus the City of Medford. It's 251 or App 42, starts at page 47. It's on page 2012. And this case talks about those things that Peter brought up, the Nolan and Dolan tests, right? Nexus and proportionality. And the idea, again, that is whatever you're asking the applicant to do, it's got to be directly related to the impact of the development, and it also has to be proportional to the impact of the development. But the idea here, the burden is on the city to show why whatever you're asking the applicant to do, why it's necessary, why the exaction or the condition, why it meets those tests. So you have to give reasons. Now, I know that back in that Brown case, the court said a dedication, in that case, it was unconstitutional. Based on the facts, they couldn't do a dedication. It just wasn't constitutional at all. It was a taking. In this particular case, I remember, I know back in July, this committee was talking about 2005, right? There's this condition that we had back in 2005. The reason why we're going to have this applicant dedicate this property that he doesn't own, by the way, is because we said so back in 2005. And really that was the only reason. So I went back and I looked at 2005 and I said, okay, what were the reasons back in 2005 where they said this piece of land, this easement has to be dedicated? And there were no reasons. There's nothing there. It just says it has to be dedicated. So back in 2005, the very fact that they didn't even offer any reasons is pretty much a per se unconstitutional taking, because if you're not going to offer any reasons, then there are none really for that dedication. So if the only reason that we're talking about, hey, we've got to require dedication is because 2005, there were no reasons back then, there's no reasons today. And so if you don't have reasons, you can't ask for that kind of dedication. And especially here, by the way, Brown was a case where the same person owned all of it.
Hey, Russ.
Right? Sorry?
5-minute rule.
Yeah, that's correct. I'm sorry, sir. We did have it, we haven't started the clock, but it's been 5 minutes. But okay, I understand where you're coming from.
You understand, and I'm done. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm so are there any more questions from our commissioners?
My question is, basically what we're maybe trying to do is, instead of having Heritage pave from Highway 101 to the railroad, just pave in front of the 3 lots.
Correct.
And I think that's that's what they intend to do. I believe that's correct.
The explanation about the easement, the fact that there is an easement, I think that's a good explanation that the intent of it is to be used, to be driven on. Right? You know, that I get that part. So is that what the applicant is in favor of doing?
Well, we won't ask him that yet, but I have a question for Peter specific to what I might propose. And Peter, I don't know if you're still there, but the question I had, can we require, before we allow the partition, can we require Johnson or Heritage Homes to put a maintenance agreement to maintain these? I mean, that's my concern. My concern is the reality of the development, which is fine, they're going to pave in front of the houses, but they're going to have umpty cars going up and down that road. And if you know, Evans doesn't want to maintain the road, and Johnson says, I'm selling the houses, somebody needs to maintain the road. And I'm suggesting if we require that he'll have 3 lots, if the partition goes through, and each of those 3 lots has the necessity to share in the maintenance of that road. So is that something we can do, Peter, or is that beyond our?
It wouldn't be, it's not a city road, so it would be like their road. Each of those houses, they would be responsible for that. Whether they could pay in to help maintain the gravel portion of the road, I mean, I think you would want to ask the 2 lawyers whether that's something that they would be willing to stipulate to.
Could you require it and say at the owner's consent, with the owner's consent? I mean, we have no right to require the adjacent property owner to do anything at this time. So I wouldn't want to put a condition on the applicant that the applicant couldn't do without the cooperation that's outside of their control to do. With that said, I think all of us can see the utility of having those property owners contribute to the you know, in some sort of fashion to the unimproved gravel road that they're utilizing. But unless they're willing to stipulate to it, I'm not comfortable with that as a condition because it's out of the applicant's control.
It's out of the applicant's control?
Right, so they could offer to do it, but that doesn't mean that the adjacent owner would be required to let them.
Yeah.
Oh.
Because it's no longer a joint agreement.
Like the adjacent property owner wouldn't have to sign that agreement. They could just say, no, I'm not going to enter into a maintenance agreement with you. And then that could create a reason for them to say, well, they didn't meet this condition, so they can't do the partition. So when I'm writing conditions, my general rule is not to write a condition that's outside of the applicant's control. With that said, if the applicant is willing to stipulate to that as a condition, that is for the benefit of the adjacent property owner. And so if that adjacent property owner found that attractive, then they could agree to it. And they could do it amongst themselves. So I guess I'd be interested to hear their thoughts on whether they'd be willing to do that.
Okay.
And I'll speak on behalf of the applicant for that one. I'd be happy to talk to Mr. Main about a possible maintenance agreement, but I agree with Peter. There are things that the applicant can't control. So we can't stipulate to something that we can't control. But that being said, there are statutory provisions in place that govern how a road gets maintained if there is no agreement. And right now there isn't anything. So usually the way the statute lays it out is whoever's using the easement is in combination with the owner, they're all going to pay for their proportionate use of the easement. Whatever those costs are, they're going to split it up depending on how much traffic or use they generate on the road.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So that was the only question I had. So do we have, I mean, are we going to make, does anybody have a proposal to make that where we readdress what we did a month ago?
I apologize, one further clarification.
Yeah.
We keep referring to dedication in the context of paragraph 3 of 2005, but there's really no reference to dedication. There's reference to improving it to public street standards and improving it consistent with city standards, et cetera. There's no reference to dedication. It may be moot because we've been told that this was never reported, therefore this is irrelevant. It still makes me uncomfortable that we're ignoring what our predecessors told us to do at this trigger point. So that's where I sit.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I think we are kind of, not in a position to in this case, to do anything about it. But so I guess, are we going to, I guess our options are to resubmit it as it was last make a revised declaration and submit that.
Can I help you look at the right piece of paper?
Yeah.
Okay, so the decision that you received as a draft form, dated 8/4, right? I don't need to go through the red comments that were made. They were really for clarification. If you want to just focus on what you decided, page 13 and 14 are your decision, and very top of 15. And fortunately, I didn't get number 3 transferred right until tonight, which is on that piece of paper that looks like this. Is the main one, but we need to look at number 3. Let's just look at number 3 and see what you said. And I would look at this version of number 3 because it didn't come out right. It didn't come out complete in this draft decision.
And Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, for the record, I would appreciate if we could hear that because I don't have that in front of me, so I'm not sure what we're looking at.
Okay, you want me to read it? Right now, as of the last month, you approved a condition that said, in 2005, the Cutler land partition approval, the city administrator, Dennis McNally, said that, quote, if additional development were to occur, the access easement would need to be dedicated to the city as a public road and paved to city standards, end quote. Therefore, the final plat shall include dedication of the easement to the city of Gerhardt as a public street. Prior to issuance of an occupancy permit of the first home construction, Cutler Lane shall be dedicated to public street and paved at the applicant's cost from Highway 101 to Parcel 3 per city local street specifications. The existing road and utility easement shall be rewritten to service the new properties. And just below that, you did refer to a road maintenance agreement as another requirement. And it fits into that condition, but it wasn't exactly, that was added.
You say existing road and utility shall be rewritten. Shouldn't it say existing road and utility easement shall be rewritten?
Yeah. So the question is, after tonight's input, how you would change this, delete this, or what you want to do with it.
And it's not only number 3, but also number 4 has also kind of come up for debate.
Oh yes, and number 4, back to the document with red. You talked about I'm going to drop in the second half there. In addition, enter into a maintenance agreement for Pelton Lane Road utility easement, right? And you talked about the apron, right, where it's dangerous to get on the highway, just at the highway intersection, that 25 by 20 foot paved approach for safety. But now that's on another person's property. And based on what we've heard tonight, I don't think you can require that either.
But it does say with the owner's agreement.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, I put that in as the only way you can do that. Thank you.
But then even, so if that sentence stood alone, let's stay with number 4 for a moment.
Yeah.
If that sentence stood alone, then the with the owner's agreement portion might be sufficient to kind of leave that one in.
It's a good idea. Everybody likes the road maintenance agreement. If they don't get the agreement, that's the end of it.
Right. The second sentence and the third sentence doesn't really refer to with the owner's agreement anymore. It just says do it, and enact a shared road maintenance agreement and enter into a maintenance agreement, which we've been told by Peter we really can't compel.
Right, and so my notes here for you tonight, or you could add the same wording.
Exactly.
With the consent of the existing owner.
Right, we have to apply that to all 3
right
sentences.
Right, so that could be an opening statement for whole number 4.
One more question.
Make sure that's with the agreement of both parties. Christian, do you have thoughts on that?
As far as the road maintenance agreement?
Right, and maybe the apron onto the highway.
The obligation to do the additional paving onto 99.
On to 99?
101.
Wrong city, Peter.
Okay. All right. I just want to make sure. I'm in the right city. Okay.
All right. I'm in the metro area right now.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm not exactly sure where ODOT's right-of-way and EPI property starts. So I don't know exactly what kind of authority or control that the applicant would have as far as paving in that area. So I don't know that I can stipulate that right now.
I can answer that right now, that ODOT responded after last meeting's decision and said, had no problem with it as long as you get a permit from ODOT to make those improvements.
And there's the crux right there, is that permits from ODOT are not always guaranteed. in fact, frequently not guaranteed at all. So I would say as long as it says, with ODOT's approval, and if ODOT approves, then I think we could accept the condition, because now it's back into the applicant's control, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's good. Well, we can add that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think that's on me.
That's great.
Okay, but now back to John. Did you have more of these bullet points you wanted to comment?
Yeah, just one question. Why is the language? I must be missing where something came from, because the language referring to Dennis McNally in this revision is different than the language that Sarah Nebaker signed off on. Again,
yes, right out of the draft that you saw that you approved. It's what I wrote.
No, I'm referring to.
Yes, I go ahead.
So it says, if additional development, the quoted section.
Yes.
That quoted section is different from the language in the New York Planning Commission document that, because remember I said earlier, there's no reference to dedicating to the city?
I think that was in the minutes.
So
well, he's talking about the quoted section.
yes, I
here,
know what he's
whether
talking
that's
about, but now I don't have it right in front of me, but I think it's in the minutes. It's up 2005.
In the minutes versus this document.
Versus the decision.
Versus the decision.
Yeah, because it wouldn't go in the decision. That makes sense. Thank you for bringing that up.
Wouldn't it be, I mean, if we chose to keep this, which I'm not sure we can.
Well, it was part of the motion that Russ made was keep the Dennis McNally language in there.
As opposed to the Sarah Becker never
yes.
language.
And that's what you said. And
yeah, and that was, we're talking about last meeting.
Yes.
Right.
Which I think this is all moot at this point.
Well, not necessarily, but that's where that came from.
That's what we're trying to determine if it,
yeah.
But I'm saying to determine whether we're going to do it or not, we still want to decide which of these pieces of language is the right one.
You don't need to leave it all in there as a second look now if you don't want to have it written.
Understood.
Like
understood.
That.
So I'll just leave it at this. If the body determines they want to keep this,
yes, I
think we should quickly revisit which version of the language we want to keep, because they're quite different.
You could just say the 2005 decision, I guess, and not say about anybody's quote.
I want to go back to the existing road and utility easement shall be rewritten to service the new properties. Who's going to rewrite that? And how can you rewrite an easement without both parties agreeing to the language?
Yes, and that's where at the owner's property, not all parties agreeing would have to be.
So what happens if Evans doesn't agree?
Well, so that's a different question. To our attorneys, does not the easement serve it already?
Okay.
And that was part of your part of the motion.
Right.
And that, so maybe it's unnecessary because the easement right now serves that property.
According to our attorney. He said probably.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was that, okay.
Do you want to we get Peter back on?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the plat, it shows the road easement going the entire length of the property.
And you're saying that that can be used ingress and egress for 2 additional parcels?
Yes.
I would also note for the commission, there's been discussion this evening that the 2005 easement didn't exist and that an easement didn't actually come into existence until 2013. So that calls into question the validity of the 2005 easement that's indicated on the plat. So I think we have a completely new issue of, well, what was the actual easement that was dedicated in 2013?
This is what's known as a lawyer's delight.
Lawyers alike.
So if we asked Heritage to pave in front of the 3 lots, now would that section of Cutler become a city street? Would it be dedicated to the city?
No.
Okay, so we're going to stop.
Just leaving.
I think it's only paved for the purpose of the fire department. I mean, because that's where they have the turnout, what do we call it, the turnout for the fire truck. That was my understanding, that it was going to be paved for that purpose.
Well, I thought we were asking it to be paved and dedicated because that's in the subdivision ordinance.
No, we weren't requiring it to be dedicated. It's proposed to be paved, and it only makes sense because it's really a set of 3 driveways and a hammerhead turnaround.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just out of pure function. That's the way you would do it for any new house. It's a small area.
Right.
That was part of the proposal anyway.
It was part of their proposal anyway. And I did ask the surveyor, is this a new easement? It's great, it's being attached to an existing easement. And it's a new easement because it's serving the 3 parcels for access and fire turnaround, which is already there. It's incorporating the fire turnaround into this easement for all 3 of those property owners to go across all day long.
So then how does subdivision ordinance even come into play then if we weren't asking, because a partition would require a dedication and city standards?
A partition would require them to give it to us if we wanted it. And in this case, we don't, because it's essentially 3 driveways. This is recorded as a road easement, but we don't want this to be a city street because this is just their driveways and we wouldn't want to be responsible for its maintenance.
And just to clarify, we would only be able to, if you wanted to make this a city street, it would only be for the new application.
Right.
We couldn't do anything for it before. And again, the city wouldn't want this as a road anyway. It's not a standard road, it's an easement and driveway mostly.
We asked Peter if we need to leave this sentence in about the existing road and utilities which shall be rewritten.
I would leave the plat language in, illustrating that the plat that everybody saw had an existing utility and road easement running the entire length of the parcel.
Okay.
What language are you referring to leave in? That's not what the language currently says.
Can you read it to me?
The language the language from the July meeting simply says the existing road and utility easement shall be rewritten to service the new properties. But the revision that Carol brought to us today, she read earlier as there's much more content to that. Would you like me to reread that too?
I don't want to revisit the issue of the easement as a condition. Right now we have a plat that shows the easement going across the entire parcel. And I don't think we want to revisit that.
So we don't need any language there at all?
Yeah.
Not denied.
I'm going to make a proposal. Is that the appropriate language? I'll move the motion so that we can move along, because it's pretty clear what direction we're getting legally. And I think that this is going to continue with the lawyers later. My proposal is we take the language from the draft A4 with all the additions. We strike 3 in its entirety, in its original version and in this new version, which is not there at all. And we change number 4 to still attempt to encourage the road maintenance agreement by putting the language such that with both parties' agreement, it's probably not anything to be enforced, but at least it indicates our intent that we wish that they would do so, and that we move to approve.
And those says in there twice with the owner's agreement on number 4, and as I added with the existing owner of the 2 parcels, agrees, but I'll word it just right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's my motion.
And otherwise, everything else is intact, because you've got 13 conditions.
We want to have some discussion about this.
Yeah, I just want to make sure you understood those other 2 additions on number 5 that you talked about in June and July, saving those 2 trees, number 2 and number 5. That was what you wanted, and you hadn't gotten to a decision yet, so it's coming back now. And then number 8, the final plat shall illustrate a 5-foot wide recreation trail access easement. And I wanted to add either on the north property line, which is what it said in your last version, or an alternative location as agreed upon by the applicant city, because we might find a better way to get there. And we've just been out there walking it, and we'd like some flexibility because it's a whole new idea that has to align north and south with other properties, and that just makes it more flexible.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have any discussion?
We need a second.
We need a second before we discuss it.
Did anybody second it? Well,
I'll second it.
There we go.
Okay.
I had to
Okay. Motion and second. Now, what about discussion?
I think we've discussed it.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, all those in favor of the revision as presented by John, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, well. Oh.
May I abstain?
Sure. Yes.
I'm going to abstain because I have objections to this that I cannot back up legally. So I'm just.
Okay. All right. Okay. So that is the end of the first partition of the evening.
Thanks.
Thank you. And so we are now going to number 2206, Chris Town's partition application Park Lane. The application for approval of a tentative land partition to divide one parcel into two on a parcel located east of Park Lane and a median density R2 zone. So Carol, I'll go back to you.
Okay.
Present what you know about that.
Are you ready for this? You sure? I gotta sort these papers out here. It's like I'm buried.
Just what I tried to
do. Yeah, we can take a minute to get ourselves started.
Wait, he was asking for it at the beginning, which is a little difficult, but I.
Oh, yeah, well, I was ex parte for the whole evening, but you have an ex parte on this particular.
Well, I just went and looked at the site.
Good, that's good to hear.
Well.
And
I did as well.
okay, there's three that went to the site and looked at.
And I did as well. Is that something we're supposed to present to the?
Yeah, it's safe to do that.
Yeah.
Not just content.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Bias and ex parte content.
Okay, I did look at the site. 4 of us looked at the site.
And I went today and actually talked to Chris and Alicia while I was there.
Okay.
Did you learn anything that they need to know? Or do you want to bring it up?
We walked the site and just kind of looked at, talked about the path that you guys were thinking out, and yeah, just kind of got my eyeballs on it. We talked about the water issue.
Good, drainage.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see, there's one new piece of paper on this one. It came from Clatsop County DEQ. No, there's more than one, sorry. Was that in their packet? No.
Yeah, it's good.
What? Oh, you did get that, good. I just got it yesterday. Yeah, that one, that's it. And then there's a petition from, I believe, 4 neighbors on Park Lane, 1306, 1310, 1312, 1316, and 1318. And then tonight you received one other thing from this forum. Right? We'll get back to that, I guess. Just wrote something good today. No. Yeah, here it is. Oh, never mind, that's all. Show up as I get started now. Okay, this is the land partition to divide one parcel into 2. Private driveway access on an uphill dune. I'm glad you've all seen it because that helps visualize from the end of Park Lane, which is a city street and is also an R2 medium density residential zone. Okay, there are comments at the bottom of page 1 and 2, when we have 2 experts here. We have the not the local fire chief, but the state fire marshal, Chris Dubin. Thank you for waiting out this out, come out.
No, this is interesting.
Yeah.
I've never been to a planning meeting, so this is very interesting.
Well, I'm sure you'll never go again.
Can't really answer that one.
There's a lot of talking. And then the city building official, Leonard Brogdon, which you maybe don't always get a chance to talk to. And they both have comments in here that right now, I guess I won't summarize because they're all right before your eyes. And we'll come back to some of the details. And you all have the map of what's going on here and what's around it. So, got out for illustration of some of the things I'll try just to summarize here. Yeah, two things I added are the DEQ letter and the petition from 4 owners on Park Lane dated page 5. This parcel, all of you been there, you said? It's up on a dune, which used to be the old railroad bed, right? And as you saw it, you were like me, unfortunately shocked when I first saw it, because all the trees are gone and it's just a big sand dune. And there's houses at the bottom of that dune. And in fact, Cutler is a similar situation because it comes up to that dune and it has trees that will make some of the same kind of changes when homes are built over there. Not to the same elevation, I don't think, but anyway, it's like a couple hundred feet away from Cutler. So it's really identical in scene there. Highway access, but this is a city street in this case. We've mentioned soil stability and the building official is actually working on the Park Lane subdivision sand dune right now with the property owner, Ronnie Parham, to have it geomatted.
No.
Sorry.
Bonnie's not part of anything.
Well, and she said where her house is.
Yeah.
That's just in relation to the opposition and the petition and the dune location. Okay, never mind. So it's not complete to what you've seen. There will be plannings to stabilize the dune that are ongoing right now.
Wait, are you saying plantings or planning?
Planting.
Planting.
Yeah, it's a geomat that we can talk about in a minute, but it's full of seed and
they're huge mats that actually lay down. They're 4 to 6 inches thick and they attach. Then they have seeds and you can do additional plantings.
Yeah,
it's like the state highway uses. You see a lot of them on the highways.
So is that mat gonna go on the western portion of the?
No, I get turned around.
of the dune. Yeah, it would be on the whole west side of the dune.
slope.
The face, when you walk up to that.
Yeah, that's the western.
Yes.
Yeah.
Behind the Parham's property is where it would be, and it could be temporary for the foreseeing of someone else purchasing the lot. And then there's also an ability for, through the planning and the engineer I have, to build, someone to build a retaining wall to fill that back in there to make it more stable even then. So
well, yeah, maybe we should, I mean, we always do this, we just kind of go through it and you can get your questions all formulated, that's okay.
Well, I'm sorry for interrupting.
I hate to lose the train of thought though, sometimes that's okay. There are no trees on this at the top anymore, and that happened in the past, right or wrong, there are no trees left, there's no wetland. And on the east side, the slope goes down and it's actually city property, city right away on his east boundary. And there's 60 feet of city right away, which we 3 of us walked this week. And that's where the trail should go, is down there. Just, we'll get back to that, but the railroad north-south trail, right? Okay, water runoff. Because of the dune, there's naturally going to be a lot of water runoff at the bottom of the dune when it rains, and it happens over on Cutler. It happens and other properties in the same way. And the applicant will tell you about his plans to, he's already got it underway to put a permanent catch basin where the road meets, where the driveway meets Park Lane. And really you think about this as being 2 flag lots off of Park Lane. It's what it amounts to, it's just 2 driveways. The utilities, they have DEQ approval subject to what we have in the letter tonight, which just requires a 10-foot setback for anything else installed in the driveway from any utilities that are installed in the driveway. And there's a 4-inch water line there already to be extended, fire access. Okay, this fire engine and the fire department will not be going up there on the dune, as far as I know, because they're requiring a hydrant at the base of the dune in Park Lane. I'll let you talk to. And all their comments I summarized, so if you want to go back to those, we can, but both Leonard and Chris's comments are in this report on page 2. I want to go back to that. The let's see. So zoning is really just R2 zone, 7,500 square foot lots. One of these is 12,165 square feet. The other is almost 12,000 square feet. So they are definitely within the range of the minimum lot size. The development standards, wetlands, streets. New single family dwelling or duplex, if it fronts a street, is affected by the city street standards. And so in this case, they're bringing a driveway to a city street, and the driveway itself is not a public street. It's an easement between the 2 property owners. It is not being paved. Probably better that's not paved, going up on the slope that it's on, but we'll talk about that too. The shared use path is required in our transportation improvements, and we think it should be on not on his property, but we want to find a way to get to the path on this property for this neighborhood, fairly dense neighborhood. They'll go up the driveway on a 5-foot easement, maybe 5-foot pedestrian easement between the 2 houses down to the path, which actually there's a place down below where we think the elk can already go and they've already made the path. So it's actually realistic someday. Let's see. New street is not proposed. I'm just kind of running through the zoning here and the waivers. No streets, nothing really related to streets in this case, since everything is on private property abutting a city street. I'm back to the subdivision ordinance now on page 8. There's no prior or anticipated development plans that affect this site. TSP does not identify additional improvements to Park Lane. It only identifies the right-of-way, railroad right-of-way for a path. There's plenty of room there, 60 feet. Existing streets, whenever existing streets adjacent to a tract are in adequate width, additional right-of-way should be provided. This is not the case here. These parcels are not abutting Park Lane. In fact, they're not even in the Park Lane subdivision. Some of the issues raised by the neighbors as far as deed restrictions, and they never expected this to happen, and this is against their deed restrictions, and you can't develop up there, is really, I know, is irrelevant because these parcels are not part of that Park Place subdivision phase 1, phase 2. There are 10 lots that were approved in the subdivision process. These are separate parcels. You're going to see more of these up on the dune, because especially I think to the north, there's more that were deeded over to the adjoining property owner that have this shape that are up high. Not very many built on the dune yet on this railroad. Too bad maybe that we didn't pick it all up, but we already have 60 feet adjoining that dune in this location. And it's, you know, the city doesn't need it for anything. So that's the subject on streets. They're not required to do anything to the park lane. We should require them to include a road maintenance agreement, should say for the 2 parcels accessing the driveway, not 3. And I believe that's a condition, proposed condition of approval. So I've already mentioned on the transportation system plan requirements on page 9. I don't quite know yet where we should go through there. There is a funny little parcel at the south end of you that I haven't looked enough yet at, but maybe that could be a way to get over the trail. So the condition would be similar to the last one, that it go through their driveway and down, or an alternative location if we find a better one between now and final plat. Which, by the way, is all partitions have 2 phases of review, preliminary and final. I'll come back to you just like Cutler will in this final version to make sure everything is satisfied. I don't think so. Recreation and utility easements, just covered that. Building sites. Are these lots appropriate for their location, environmental features, and type of development for a building? And each lot shall abut a street for a width of 25 feet. Through lot should be avoided. Lot lines should run at right angles. That's your building subdivision building site requirement. And the lots are, the lot in itself is one big long one right now being divided in 2. The lot in its original parent situation right now does not abut a street for 25 feet. And it can't, because parkland doesn't go up the dune. So you have to take that into consideration. And then it's not a through lot, the lot lines are at right angles. Is it appropriate for this location based on environmental features? Well, we're doing our best to preserve the 60-foot easement adjoining it and city ownership. There are a lot of trees that are going to be just to the east of these parcels. You probably saw them. There are no trees on it now, and that's another story in the past. But so yeah, it meets all the requirements for lot size, lot shape. They have to build more than 35% lot coverage. They each abut a 25-foot road utility easement that's going across the applicant's property to the south of Park Lane. And they're like a flag lot. They really are a flag lot, 2 flag lots. So the impacts of prior salt site alteration, tree removal, and dune grading necessary to accommodate these were previously approved by the fire marshal and your building inspector before it came here. So you can talk to them about that if you'd like. And additional drainage management for each of these 2 home sites is required to avoid downhill runoff. And it's kind of a hole at the bottom, just naturally where Park Lane ends and the east flag lot driveway comes down is low. So the applicant will tell you how he plans to deal with that. And yeah, I didn't mention on the east side, there's also Skookum Creek. So we don't want water running down that side either. Luckily it's wooded and has full depth of thyme and shrubs and everything to slow the water down, which is no longer on the west side. So it shouldn't be a problem on the east side, but still we want to direct the drainage from the gutters and driveways in the right direction to then be captured so it doesn't cause any problems. No wetlands on the side up there on top. Improvement standards, sewer, water, utilities, and all the requirements for subdivision have to be met prior to any installations, street lighting, underground utilities, water main, stormwater, easement, drainage easements if necessary, damage to any existing streets like Park Lane. Notice in the public comments, a lot of comments about construction trucks, and they just, when we ever get rid of the trucks coming in here, it's very dense in there and there's not a lot of room to turn around. I think they're dealing with removing his old house right now and building a new one that's away from Park Lane, and that's probably what the trucks are all about, which is a temporary situation, I think. So, based on that scant information and summary of what's in this report, we have another set of conditions that take into account the 25-foot wide road and utility easement across the owner's tax on 905 from Park Lane to home sites shall record a road and utility maintenance agreements between your property and the two properties on top. Your property being where the road easement is coming in to before it hits Park Lane. So right here, we're requiring a road maintenance agreement between the three parties involved. A 10-foot setback from the west property line is required to maintain the grade stability of the dune, unless a retaining wall is built down below, which the building inspector and the applicant have been discussing and back and forth. And it would, if you don't put the wall up, it will affect where the house on top is located. It must be at least 10 feet from that property line.
From the ascending slope.
From the ascending slope, thank you.
Can I just clarify that? So the house starts 10 feet from the top of the slope?
Yes.
Yes.
So
that's the minimum.
You gotta go 10 feet back from the top of that slope.
Yes.
From the west line, yeah. And the width of the lot is 60 feet. It's going to be two narrow houses, 30 feet. You can tell us that in a minute.
Is that 10-foot easement also apply to the east side?
Any slope.
Okay, yeah.
Any slope of that steepness.
Yes, yeah.
Is that 1-to-1 grade?
That we think, yeah, it's about 1.3, somewhere in there.
It's the steeper slope than some. Okay, and I'll let you talk next. So then the trail, depending on the topography, we wanted to go to the right of way. And we figured that out at final plat. City water has to run 2 lines down the driveway, and the meters will be placed on the south side of the Park Lane when we get to the bottom. The owner is responsible for parts and labor to tap into that. The planning commission finds thorough analysis of water runoff from the 2 home sites is required, coincident with the building plans for the 2 home sites, and a minimum unless engineering identifies a preferred method. The applicant is required to enlarge the existing dry well at the base of the dune and construct individual dry wells on the 2 home sites on top, subject to their approval. And water runoff from roofs and asphalt should be treated prior to emptying into the creek on the east side. Prior to occupancy of the dwelling, comply with the building inspector and state fire marshal's requirements. They're all listed there. Hydrant, slope, easement for the dry well, water runoff, West County DEQ, which we just got today or yesterday, 8-9, indicates the utilities shall be installed along the north side of the driveway to serve 2 adjacent parcels. And the minimum of the driveway going up is 14 feet and required to be moved 8 feet to the south. I want to make sure that's true.
Well, there's some confusion on it. He'll explain it.
Yeah, okay. Anything that happens, let's see. Right, I don't think we have any ODOT issues. It looks like that's mixed up between Cutler and Towns at the same meeting. And all the other utility requirements listed there. And then I think these are standards that show up mostly on the final plat about surveying. There's again some repeat about drainage, stormwater, water mains to city specs, utilities would be installed underground, street lighting, not likely required, no parking, and any other street signs should be installed. Of course, they on the dune, I guess you might have to put a sign. It says no parking on the driveway going up, but I don't think anybody would do that, but you never know. And any damage to park lane. It's really hard to write two partitions at the same time.
Yes.
Literally, there's a lot of cut and pasting going on. Okay, so there's a draft decision. There's a photo of the east side that you got, and that shows where the property line is in relation to the east side, and the property goes down a little ways from there. There's nothing to elaborate on other than it meets the city right away. And then this is the applicant's existing home, and that's going to be torn down, and that's where the drainage problem is right here. So if there's any need to talk more about that, that's going away, and that will really improve just the accessibility going up and down the park lane once that's removed. And there's the construction vehicles. And there's the dune that we talked about. And Ronnie Parham's property we received letters from is the house. This is one right here. And I think they're going to tell you they are going to go ahead and put up a retaining wall for extra fortification. Okay, so that's the end of my staff report. Would you like to speak now?
Well, yeah, if our two gentlemen here have something to say specific to this, let's hear it.
I'd like to comment on the flooding issue. That's been a big deal. I've seen the letters coming in. That flooding issue started years back. The home that's next to his property, when they went in and built that home, they elevated the lot about 4 feet. So the street dead ends into it. They elevated it, so that started the trap there. I mean, I'm sure there's always been an issue because it's a hill and dead ends there. But that increased the problem there, those last two homes that were built. But Chris has taken it on himself. Just last winter, before the end of our rainy season, he put in a dry well, and that's just a pit with big rock. And it catches the water, it gives it time to soak in naturally into the groundwater. And that made amazing improvements there. I went down and caught that last rainstorm right after it happened, and instead of 1.5 feet of water in there was only 2 or 3 inches. And then he's indicated that he's going to enlarge that as soon as the older home is removed. And I think that's going to really help and lessen the impact in there during the rain events on the water.
Good. And then remember, we'll go to the applicant for his chance, but so maybe hold your questions so we can go through it in a moment. Thank you. Anything you want to add?
Chris, you have anything to add?
First off, I've never been to a planning commission meeting,
but it's usually the fire chief would address these. The fire chief came to me because he has a conflict. You know, he lives right there. So he asked me to come and represent the fire department, which is normally what we do. We normally would want the fire chief. He's the one that, but we both all work under the same code. So there was a couple of different things that there was a concern here, and that was the road going up to the driveway or fire department access road, we call it. Our concern was once the road's in there, part of it was, yeah, paint the roads red, make sure there's no parking. These are going to be driveways. They're going to be parking up there anyway, so it's going to be a nightmare just trying to get the police to enforce that. So we were trying to come up with another idea to bring it back down. Let's just make it a driveway. Let them, it's private homes, let them do what they want on their driveway. Let's not regulate so much. But in doing that, that reduces the ability of the fire department to be able to get all the way up there. So with that in place, there was two things that fell into place. One was the fire hydrant. There is a fire hydrant at the highway. If these homes were to be built, there would be another hydrant required. So we said, okay, let's put it at the base of the driveway. It benefits the whole neighborhood, not just the properties that are building it, but it will benefit the whole neighborhood. So that's good.
And your hoses are sufficient length to.
Absolutely. So most fire departments they'll carry up to 1,000 feet of the large diameter hose for hydrant water. You have the one hydrant there. You lay that hydrant, you've limited your ability to have one vehicle in there. If you have another hydrant in there, you have that ability for a backup truck to be able to actually take the two hydrants and be able to have, if we have a major event in that area. So we look at that stuff, and we're always looking at the worst case scenario. And then the other thing was, since we're not going to have that road that's up to the standard that the fire department can get all the way up there, we required them to put a deed of restriction on the houses that are going to be built. They will be sprinkled. So that will take care of the two issues that we really have responsible for, and it's the fire department access and water supply. That is our true concern on it. Everything else is this will take care of that. So it was really trying to compromise. There was a lot of resistance at first, but then when we thought about the big picture, and let's face it, is our police going to go up there and force somebody to move their car and stuff like that? That wasn't a realistic thing. So we decided that this might be the best way of doing this to get it fire protection for these two structures and for the neighborhood.
Okay. Okay, well then, I guess you look to applicants. If the applicants have anything you'd like to say, I would. You can give yeah.
This is my wife, Alicia, and this is also my engineer that come to help. He's the one helping me on our project.
And so first of all, give us your name and
My name
address.
is Christopher Pounds. I live at 1321 Park Lane, Cedar, Oregon 97138.
Can you stand up so we can hear you?
Yes, sorry.
There's old people here.
Old ears.
So what I would like to start at as the beginning is that some things that were mentioned on that I think Carol just got confused is that Chris never was part of, or any of the fire marshals were ever part of the retreat room of agreement. It was Mark. Mark
I
Bryan.
didn't say he was.
Yes, actually, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. You said the fire.
I said fire marshal.
You said
I wasn't part of that. So,
yeah, so I just, yeah, so I was just going to clarify that. At that time, I was just moved here. We just got it, and we just got back from Chad and all this that Mark agreed. And for whatever reason, I would never try to do anything that I wasn't told I could not do. And that's where I just want to make sure the truth on that. No, I just want to make sure that I did get permission, and I just wasn't trying to do anything that I wasn't supposed to be doing. The next thing is I know the concern about the 10-foot setback everybody looks to doing for a house to be so small. That is if you're building a house on top of the sand on that dune. There's also daylight basements that Brian can, whoever buys that, my intention is to sell the lot off and let someone that wants to develop, have a home and build whatever type of home they desire, put in there with whatever Leonard and the city allows. And that would be, that's just the main idea. I would prefer to keep the one to the south, and the one behind Miss Barham would be developed into someone else, come in and look and see that I went through all the requirements that you guys are requiring me to do, and the fire marshal and building inspector officials and everyone. And if that was to come into place to put the retaining wall, to be able to get more area for them to do whatever they need to do, then I just want to make sure that I have that in hand from everyone, including you, to give that to whoever that would be interested in that, to do it properly. And regardless of what happens in the future, we are going to map this hillside, plant it back what we were told, Chad and I agreed on, to put it back in the native grasses whenever we get that map. Until that property is sold, I don't even know how long that would be or when a house would be there. But until then, if I do the due diligence to get it to that point to where everybody, it's not an eyesore. I agree, I live there. I don't like looking at the sand either. I'm ready for the fall comes to get it took care of just for that situation. All I'm gonna do is do exactly what's correct for no different than Mr. Nathan back here that's doing his things. As far as a developer, I'm a general contractor. I'm trying to move forward in my, last 3 years when I got my license, and I feel like that I'm trying to be part of the community and do whatever is the right thing to do for the next step. So if you got any bullets for me, I'm ready. I want to make these meetings. I'm going to come more often so I can learn more in case I need to ask questions in the future and follow what you guys, what your meeting is about. So I'm ready.
Okay, well, I guess I'll turn it over to my fellow commissioner. If there's questions from the commissions, let's go.
I have a couple of questions. This might be for you. So you said you were planning just to sell the lot, that one north lot, and we talked about that a little bit today. Just clarify that. I feel like if whatever we decide, and the proper documentation that needs to be done on our part, so that the Cutler Lane scenario doesn't come up for the new owners. You know what I mean? So I just make sure we do that the right way to facilitate what you guys need and future owners.
Referring to like the easements, the access,
exactly.
Hang on, just one at a time.
I was going to have her stand up. Yeah,
if you have something to say, stand up and tell us.
And I think that's mostly on our part, probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
So to avoid another situation like we had with the other one.
We have already, Larry Popkin has already done the driveway, everything. You should have a copy of it. The road maintenance that you guys were requiring. Now, there should be a copy of it in there. It's already drawn out. Perfect.
Yes, we also want to make sure that there is no
right.
That's clarified.
Excuse me for just a moment, just for sakes of the minutes and all that, could you stand and give us your name and address?
Yes, my name is Alicia Towns. Now, Chris and I just got married at the end of May, but these documents all reflect my maiden name is Alicia Smith. But yes, we also want to make sure that the easements, road maintenance agreement that is in there and that is clear access for the two lots and who will maintain them. So
the one other question I have is about the dune stability. And I think Sharon and I have talked about this. We live nearby each other and I'm on Summit. So I think this is like an opposite scenario, but they did build those houses on Pine Ridge and Kershal. And we're getting reports from neighbors that their houses are starting to be affected a little bit. And so in this situation, I just want to make sure that the dune is a proper place to build and engineered correctly. And also that, we don't really know what's going to be happening in 40 years. So, I mean, is that, how do you feel about that?
Can I clarify that just a little bit?
Sure.
So he's talking about the houses that were built into the dune on concession. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Oh, yes.
They dug way into the dunes.
Yeah.
They did put up small retaining walls, but not the height of the dune. The people who live on that dune, who are some of my
above or the ones
above,
cut in?
Above.
They cut in.
Are talking, have mentioned that they think that their houses are starting to sink.
They think or they see.
Yeah.
Right? I'm just relaying what I was told. I can't give you any other details about that. So that's what.
Right. The engineer can address this too, but I will tell you that I've 30 years of built in sand. Pacific City, Oceanside, sand doesn't settle unless it has erosion issues. Well, I'll take it back. The only way it'll settle is if you have an earthquake and it liquefies. And it can.
There we go.
But sand is actually in many ways more stable than good brown sandy loam out here soils. So the big thing is protecting it from water erosion and sloughing, and which the engineer here has taken great lengths to do that here on Chris's property. That was my concern from the beginning, was to stabilize that from any sloughing, and that's being addressed here.
Can we hear from the engineer?
Yeah, my name is Brian Weisner. I work at Weisner Engineering. I live in Astoria.
Your address. What's your address?
1258 Sonora and Astoria 9713.
Can you repeat that street?
Sonora Avenue.
Sonora.
SONORA. For this retaining wall and the soil retaining, I think this application that we're actually going above and beyond what's required. It would be stable with just the retaining wall that I've already designed, but then Chris also wants to put in the geomat, which is also used to reinforce the soil. The mat that I looked at is used for slopes that exceed 45 degrees, which is incredibly steep. So that, along with the retaining wall, and as Lynn had mentioned, sand is a great soil to actually build on as long as it's confined, which it is with the retaining wall and the mat and the vegetation on the slope, so that shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, so you're saying for sure a retaining wall is going to be put in. I'm just trying to clarify.
That's the plan. I don't know for sure. I can't say for sure, but that's our plan. And I've already designed one. So
that, as I was mentioned, that we're planning on selling that lot to tell someone, and then someone might want to buy it and actually just own it. You know, I mean, I can't tell you that whoever's going to build a home up there, if they have to go through the city or whatever to build the house, they can put a daylight basement house in, like Leonard and I discussed before, where you dig down and you only have to have a small retaining wall. You know, I mean, you can be 12, you can put a 12 all the way down to the bottom of where it's parking, you know, where it's great. I mean, there's so many things that you can do. You can build your house on top of that.
Okay, so you're going to leave that up to whoever buys that then?
Yes, ma'am.
Just clarify.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. I don't want to be a liar either. If I choose to do that myself as well, depends on how things go in my construction business. I mean, I might do it.
This design retaining wall you have designed is not required by our findings or our requirements. It's not being built as we speak.
It's a building required.
No, it's not required.
No, it's not required.
No.
So we really have no, unless we put it in here as required.
Right.
We have no.
We just wanted you to know that because of the concerns of the neighbors. I just thought it would be good for you folks to understand.
And we don't know if it is required until you get a house plan. Is that right? Or correct?
Well, yes and no. Depends where they put that house on that slope.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. If they wanted to bring it closer to the 10 foot that I was talking about, ascending slope, then they'd have to build a retaining out there, a wall equal to the bottom of their foundation, wherever they chose to put that. If they wanted to come closer to the slope.
So that's where we do have some control.
Yeah.
Depending on their choice of placement, a retaining wall might be required.
Oh, sure.
Or just give you more usable space up there in general.
Yeah. And Commissioner Sharon, just to clarify, this entire piece, including the slope, is owned by these folks. The scenario you're talking about where there's houses on top, then there's houses built into the slope. This is a different situation where there's just houses on top without having something built into the slope, unless they come up with some crazy design. They'd have to go through it. So this is more similar to Ridge Drive.
I thought a daylight basement would be built in.
It would go down, goes down.
Yeah.
Not into the side.
Not into the side of it there. That slope can never be manipulated like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So more like Ridge and Herschel. Or
Concession.
Thank you.
Yeah, but the dune where that ridge was built on, oh, you're talking about the east side of the bridge.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. No, sand, and the engineer can defer. Sand is actually, and to me, before I start, I never would have guessed it, but it's much more stable to build on. Sand doesn't settle unless it's been eroded or sloughed, but direct pressures, gravity loads, it does not. I mean, it's a very stable. It's just how it's dealt with after that. And there has been a lot of issues in the past with it not being dealt with properly, you know, that caused issues.
My house is built on a dune.
Is it?
Yeah, so I mean, I can understand. I don't have any issues.
Okay, so to continue around.
That's all I have.
So are you three commissioners?
No, I haven't asked.
Or you
I
have
haven't
something?
asked any of my questions.
Okay.
Are we going over? Are we
Sure, I'm done.
Well, you're done.
Okay. Not really a question for the applicant, but two suggestions here on number 7.
Yeah, I'm looking at it myself right now.
The language in bullet 1 is missing some words. It says there's a period after the turnaround and there's a requirement on sprinklers for state fire marshal approval. I don't know what it was intended to say, but it should say something like sprinklers will be required for something like that. There's some language adjustment there.
Thank you.
And then the other minor point is it's not wherever a 1-to-1 slope is created, it's wherever a 1-to-1 slope or greater is created. We're not trying to hit the magic 1-to-1 slope. It's anything where it hits that threshold. That's my only 2 points. I have no other question.
On that same right next line.
Yeah, next line. Just an observation. It's got nothing to do with this applicant. He has every right to build on property that he owns, but I think it's another shame that the town didn't address this years ago.
Yeah.
These properties should never be built on, but that's not his fault.
Or greater, you said that.
Yeah, 1-to-1 slope or greater. Okay. I'm done.
I have a question for you, Mr. Brogdon. The permission to take all the trees out, I understand, was granted by Mark Bryan.
Yeah, that was before my time.
I understand.
Yeah.
Yes. Do we have paperwork for that?
That I don't know.
Yeah, we had some initial paperwork that started, but after the conversation had, the then building official went ahead and allowed some things to happen without our knowledge.
Yeah.
And so that's what Chris was going off of, and he thought he was permitted, and I would assume, I would assume the same if I was in his shoes.
Yes.
That probably wouldn't have been permitted at that time, because the removal of the trees, they could cut down 5 trees on each lot, and in this case, it was just 1 lot, so 5 trees could have come down that were greater than 12 inches in diameter. Then, once they would have gotten their building permits for the houses, right, then the trees in the building envelope, yes, including the septic envelope, can be removed as well. Dead and dangerous, of course, and that would have been the path that we would have preferred here. Yeah, but that's not what happened. Things got started without my knowledge, and then so we rectified the situation afterwards in regards to our process. And worked with Leonard to make sure.
We made some process changes, which
we're continuing to make changes.
Okay, great. That was my next question. Okay. I stepped that off and I got about on the flat part of the northernmost parcel. I got about maybe 27 feet. I might be off by a couple of feet. So I'm standing up there and I'm like, and then you say you have to have a 10-foot setback from either.
Yeah, let me clarify that because I know you asked that. A 10-foot setback, that's if they're just gonna leave that slope there with geomats on it. If they choose to come, I wish we had a whiteboard. Oh, yeah, Mark, sure. I want to show, because we keep mentioning the retaining wall. I want to show you what that can do to the width of the building.
I understand. So you will retain, you don't have this, you've got this.
Well, no, the retaining wall is only going to come out partially. Oh. That's what I wanted you to understand. Chris, you said it's about 16 feet.
The height right now?
No,
it's only the highest point right now on that
so
south
let's
lot.
say this
Can
is
you bring
great.
that forward? I don't know if you can see it.
Oh.
Can you?
I can
Okay, never mind. I just make sure it's not far in the corner there.
Is there a light there? We good? You good? I was just asking if it's too bright.
Okay, well, let's
That's
say
too bright.
There, no, that works. Let's say this is great, baby. And I'm just gonna give you this relationship with the retaining wall. And this is the house, the fire chief's mother's home. And this is her yard, and then the slope, Ron, yes, I couldn't remember her name. And this is Chris's slope. Up here, we'll call this 12 foot. They can come in here and let's say they'll do a 6-foot retaining wall.
Who's they? The owners of the new house on top?
Chris or the new owners, whoever chooses to. So in a sense, then you can fill back to this point like this and keep that same degree of slope so it brings the usable property out. So if he does an 8-foot wall, it could be kicked around 8 foot and 6 foot. So you bring it on up, he would gain about 10 feet on top, roughly, of buildable surface, keeping the same slope he's got by just utilizing the retaining wall and backfilling.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the other thing is,
I'm trying to have this right for you.
You heard me mention, if they say he did this scenario, they did the 6 foot up to here. So then you got a 6 foot difference from this grade and the top of the retaining wall. They could go up there with the engineer and design another home, and they could get actually almost to the slope by designing the foundation equal to the wall. Because at that point, the sand is contained. So it would be a foundation basement design. And that's another way. So that's all done with engineering.
So you're saying that potentially they could have the whole 30 feet that's up there, but they could also have more.
Oh yeah, and they can create more usable by doing the retaining.
Right, that was my question
Yeah.
about that, because I'm like, how are you gonna fit a house?
I agree.
10 feet.
Who wouldn't do that?
Okay.
It's really narrow looking at it as it is right now, especially when you go to slope, big slope on one side, little slope on the other. It doesn't look wide enough to do anything, but if there is a space to do perfect.
Go ahead.
Next question is, I'm very confused about where the pedestrian path is going to go, because down the east side from that property is all wetlands.
And not exactly. We walked down there, and it's.
You did?
Yeah. It was. I thought that the first time I went, and then went back to my office. Said that's just a drop off. But then I went a second time because he said you should go up again. And the 3 of us walked it, and you can walk down, and there's a trail, an elk trail, a big people trail. There's a trail down there.
Okay.
And there's quite a bit of room.
So you're saying
we really want to go down there for the trail. We don't want to have it up. After looking at it, it doesn't make any sense to go along the side of the windows of these 2 houses as an alternative. Because there is room to do it, and there's a natural place.
So I just want to be clear about this because I was really confused about this. So you've got the back, that east slope
right
from the property.
Right.
Then you're saying the path can go right down there. And then is the creek after that?
Yes, the creek is further east.
There's a bench in there. Yeah, you have a short slope, maybe grade difference 6 to 7 feet, and then there's kind of a bench about 12 feet. And then it takes off and slopes on down out into the wetlands.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, and I walked that whole area from front to back too. It's actually pretty natural trail.
A lot of trails, trees and shrubs. It's perfect.
We take
much better than nothing.
we pick up the words for the kids down there, so we know.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, on the same vein, your house is up there is not going to be built into that hillside. You have a little land as it goes down.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Right? Is it?
No. Where?
On the east side, would a house go?
There's nothing going, they can't.
Again, remember that ascending slope, and
Yeah.
on that side, they said have the option of the retaining walls.
Okay,
It
good.
would be a lot different on that side.
Whole different scenario.
Okay, good.
If we'd have never removed any of the sand, we probably would be in a lot better situation right now, but.
And also remember setbacks, your ordinance setbacks for the property lines. 15. So that's gonna affect all that.
Okay.
So on the east side, if they were to utilize as much as they can of that flat surface, they couldn't, they have to come in. We were taping it that day about 6 feet minimum to meet the setback off the property line.
Okay. All right.
So,
one last question. Thank you for all this information because I was very confused about a lot of this. How, this is I guess for Carol or whoever can answer, how do you treat runoff that goes into wetlands? How is it? Because you say in here in a couple of places about treating it, and I'm like,
There are methods.
Well,
And I bet the engineer knows specific ones. I just know
Yeah,
that
so
water's
there's-
treated all the time.
Yeah, so there's different methods. The one I'm most familiar with is little detention basins where you use like plants that naturally soak up chemicals and stuff like that, treated bioswales. Yeah, and that treats it before it infiltrates into the ground and goes over the creek. Okay.
and then we're also gonna have, it's gonna be a requirement that they install dry wells.
Does that treat it as well? Doesn't that treat it as well there when it goes
Yeah.
on the sand?
For the gutter system and all that, to lessen any impact on sand up there.
Yeah.
all right, that's all.
Okay.
I have no questions.
I have no additional questions. You guys are great.
Yeah.
Well, the only input I have, and this is specific to the setback. I'm looking at your map here. I don't know which page it is. It's a topo map that shows the it shows the elevation changes and it shows the roadway kind of etched in there, or the roadway in there, but you're only asking for a 25 foot by 200 foot easement. The roadway is taking up more space than the 25 feet. The roadway, well, and I looked at the roadway because of the fence of Parnham, the neighbor, your current neighbor to the north, right? You're having slope and slough off, so you don't. In other words, the roadway would be right along the fence line, from 25 feet from there. Well, your map scales out that you're at 32 foot 4. If this is an accurate drawing. So I'm suggesting that we might have to have a larger easement.
It's 25 feet is all that's required for me to have an easement through there, and it's 14
You're
foot.
saying that actually the road is over in here?
I'm saying the road is here.
Yeah.
This drawing shows the, well, okay, so you have the agreement, all that stuff from Hopkins.
Yep.
That says everybody's got to maintain the easement within the 25 feet by 200 feet.
The road's not finished either, sir.
Yeah, but the road to get up to the elevation you're talking about can't be any closer to Parham's property, or it'll be up against her fence. I mean, just
there's tons of room there. Actually, I can put a retaining wall right along there that also, whatever we decide in the future to do that, that's just an access for me to be able to work there. That it's going to be moved over and be straightened up. I want to allow 25 feet, 14 foot, like
for the driving surface.
For the driving surface, and then the rest of it is all easement for utilities and everything else that we can move it over after we geomat it.
And I give them conditions that they have to either geomat it or bring in boulders, compaction, on the sides to fully stabilize it, or the retaining wall.
And I'm fine with it as long as because we were dealing with the easement on this previous, previous partition. And if the road gets out of the easement and somebody says, well, I'm not paying for that, it's not in the easement anymore.
No.
So as long as you are comfortable that you can keep it in the 25, then giddy up.
Yes, sir.
Yes, we also want to make sure that it's within that 25 foot easement, the road, the driveway getting up to the 2 lots, because we plan on continuing to live on the other lot, and we certainly want that to be, or we have kids, there'll be a fence.
So you're proposing the larger dry well, the 40 by 40.
Yes.
And so that essentially will be bigger than the easement, but that some of that will be
on my private property, just because of the house we're living in now, like Mr. Leonard pointed out, when Miss Barham had built those lots and built them up, it flooded my house.
Okay.
So I was going to rebuild the house and never do that, but until that happened, and when that happened, it actually flooded in my garage, and no one else would address the situation. I was told they were going to, I'm going to, so I took it on myself to fix the entire situation, and it'll be at my own cost.
All right, and so some of that will get on
underneath the house that I'm living on right now.
After the easement.
Yes.
Okay. Didn't you, because we mentioned about this creating an easement for the city too, to have access for that drainage well.
Okay.
I don't know if we got that in there.
Good question. Create an easement for a dry well, city access at the end of parkland.
So that is a permanent usage there for that.
Which will be paved right there. I'm going to pave that area. I have to, because I talked to Mark McFadden and he said that he would love, matter of fact, he told me, Chris, please put the meters at the end down there and the dry, because it's hard to maintain that catch basin if you don't have a hard surface around it, because it'll get drove over, and I want to do it once. And I'm the type of guy, these gentlemen know if I do something the first time, I'm gonna do it right the first time, so we don't have to address it again.
Okay, cool. Okay, well then the matter before us is, I guess Carol has her, her final decision options.
Russ, I apologize. This is not a detailed question. We'll take a minute, but just one more question for Carol. This kind of the CCNRs is not relevant. How do we know that? I looked at them. There's no reference to like what they cover, and how do you know that they're not relevant?
Well, somewhere it says there's only 4 houses that are covered by the CCNR.
Where is that?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're talking about parkland subdivision.
Yeah, right.
Okay, well, you have to look at the tax lot map.
So not this thing. She's asked
They're
her
irrelevant because they're not in the park.
I got it.
Subdivision.
But that's not based on this document. It's based on your assessment of the tax.
Yeah, if you look at the tax lots on the tax lot map, you see the original subdivision.
I see.
And these are over here. These lots are, right? Yeah, somebody's talking over here. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. That's fine. Thank you.
Carol, just want to make sure, point of order here, are we in the right place for all this discussion at this point?
Yeah, I was just gonna.
Because we still have to listen to
the public. But yeah, well, I was just gonna say, yeah, you were rushing, everyone's tired here at this end of the table. So it was just point out when you do get to making a decision, you want to eliminate number 8, condition number 8. And to the fire marshal, for some reason, I thought you weren't requiring sprinklers on each house. But because of the fire hydrants, you are.
No, there's actually required 2 different things. The hydrant at the end of the road.
Yeah.
And then that was just, there's a regulation, you're gonna have to have so much distance. So that takes care of that. But we still have, for that road to be reduced from 20 feet down to 14 feet. And instead of making the fire department access road, it said, hey, sprinkle the houses, put a restriction that whatever's going to be built here is going to be sprinkled, no matter what size it is. The code says once it gets to a certain size, you're going to have to sprinkle it, unless you don't have a water supply or anything else. The other code, this is saying we don't care what size, because the whole idea is the fire department won't, if they may, because the road is there, they may not be able to make it up there. The sprinkler buys time from the fire department, hook onto the hydrant and carry their hose up there. That's the whole idea.
I'm not sure it transferred that way between you and me.
And I might have not.
It says on page 1.
Yeah.
This alleviates the.
That's what I said twice. So if you look at page 14, we want to fix that. 7 bullet 1 should say install a fire hydrant at the base of the driveway and.
Right, and I think what it should say, where the fire chief wants it, the fire chief is really, where is it going to benefit him? So the building, whatever this gets up, he'll get together with the fire chief and say, hey, okay, we got to put a hydrant in here, where do you want it, chief? And he's going to say, I want to.
That's determined by the city.
Right.
Yeah, and I say to avoid sprinklers, but it went.
No,
that should be
there's actually two
in
different
the
things here, the hydrant and.
That was the lines I was calling out
No
earlier.
wonder there was a period there.
Yeah.
So then we want to say sprinklers are required for state.
Yeah, and that would be the deed restriction. So whatever, once they buy that lot, that's when they figure out, okay, this is a restriction. Whatever you're building, there's going to be a sprinkler system, fire sprinkler system.
Okay, thank you. I didn't have.
The hydrant should be, I think it should be beforehand.
Yeah, it's right beforehand.
Before all this takes place, before any building, there's going to be a hydrant. That's kind of the agreement on this, right? Yeah.
I need to say one more thing on page 14 of what Ms. Carroll's, where it says, obtain Cotton County DEQ. It says a road may not be located more than 10 feet. That needs to make sure that's not in there, because I have the paperwork from Lucas that it can. All I have to do, and it says in the thing that you should have from.
That was my fault, Gerald, because at the time when we met, I was thinking that was going to be a city dedicated road.
Okay.
So we were doing the hammerhead.
It says in here.
I got it.
Now we'll get rid of all that stuff.
I have to strike that.
Yeah, we take that part because then I say right after this, you have to meet the DEQ requirements.
Yep. And he has required me to put, it says on that piece of paper, if you look at that, it tells me I have to put Ecola blocks just right in front, right there along the edge of the road, protected between the drain field, which is each protection for the driveway.
Oh, the college blocks.
Yeah, the college blocks.
So it never slips.
So, yeah.
Part of that.
Okay, so we have the applicants, we have the planning commission. Are there any proponents of this development or this partition?
Proponent.
Proponent.
I'm a proponent. My name is Nathan Johnson. I live at 90856 Fort Clatsop Road. I haven't known Christopher Pounds for a very long time, but I've had some dealings with him within the last couple of years over the Cutler Lane project. And I've been the one helping Heritage Homes, my dad, through the planning process with Cutler Lane. And so I've had some exposure to what he's doing there with his partition. And I'm really excited about what he's doing there. I think ultimately it's going to be a massive improvement for some of the issues on Park Lane that we all know about. I don't even live in Gerhardt, and I've known that there's been some issues on Park Lane that's directly affected Chris in his own home. And he's worked to mitigate those issues. And I think what he's doing with these with these lots that he's trying to create is he's going to further improve that problem. And coming from a builder's perspective, I'm a builder. He's also providing future inventory, buildable lands. And to me, I think that's a really under-celebrated thing in this area. So I really applaud what he's doing. It's hard. This is such a hard process to go through, especially when you don't really, if you don't have a lot of exposure and you've never done it. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I've been through this. I've been through it with the county, the city of Seaside, that story. I've done it, and I still don't know what I'm doing. So I really appreciate what Chris is doing here. And I my dealings with him and just the communications we've had. One thing that stuck out with me, he's kind of stuck to his word, and he does what he says. And so I really appreciate that about him. And I think what he's doing is going to be a good thing for Gerhardt. So I hope that you will approve it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, with no more proponents, any opponents? Not seeing any.
Well, we have one with Ronnie.
We have somebody.
It's going to take a little bit more time because we're online here. Ronnie, if you can hear me, you can go ahead and unmute yourself if that's possible. And she did. If you can introduce yourself, Ronnie, and give us your name and address.
Yes, my name is Ravon Parham. I live at 1318 Park Lane, Gerhardt, 97138. And I own 1316 Park Lane as well as 1318 Park Lane. And I'm very much against this division of land and the possibility of construction being put on it. This was a dead-end street, And the 2 lots that I bought were to be the last 2 lots to be built on Park Lane, which is exactly why I bought the 2 lots on Park Lane. And now they will no longer be the dead end street. I checked with the Oregon Department of Forestry when the more than 5, there were at least 25 very large trees that were removed. And he did not have permission from the Department of Forestry to remove those trees. And because they need to come check to see if there were, for instance, eagle's nests, protected species up there before you can just go cutting old growth down like that. I noticed that in the conversation that he had said that he has built a drain well to help alleviate the water runoff at the end of the street. Mr. Pounds removed part of the foundation from the house that he's living in and is allowing the rainwater to run underneath the house that he is living in now to help to try to absorb some of the rain. And it's not helping because in reality, the foundation to his house has been open and exposed for many, many years. And the flooding has been a continual issue on the end of the street before my 2 houses were built. And the property that I bought for 1316 and 1318, they were not built up. Soil was removed. The property was not built up. It did not make the matter, the rain slough, the water runoff worse. It did not make it worse. It made it, it lessened the amount of water holding at the end of the road because there was actually less property. We did not build up, property was not built up to put my 2 houses on. I have dry wells in my property at my gutters that I haven't, it's not that I've talked about doing it. I have dry wells in place to help with all of the water runoff. Since all of the vegetation has been gone on this sand dune that is now to the east of me, water, like Mr. Leonard said, water just sifts right through. Sand is not stable when it comes to erosion. And the water just sifts right through and there's nothing to absorb it. There's no vegetation. And it's just been, it's increased the issue. There are times where I cannot drive out of my driveway after a heavy rain because I have a compact car and the water gets knee deep. If he puts houses up there, I have absolutely no privacy. They will sit up higher in elevation. My bathroom windows, my bedroom windows all face east, which means the whole east side of my house will be closed off. I'll never be able to have daylight on the east side of my house because there would be houses up above looking directly down into my property. I went to the offices in Astoria several times, and yes, I talked with the Department of Forestry. They said that you have to have permission in order to remove all those trees, and that if you do remove them, you're allowed to use them for personal use. For example, firewood, or if you had your own sawmill, then you could plane your own wood. This timber was sold for a profit. And it was just, everything has been done through the back door without permission because it's just easier to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission. A lot of people feel that way, and I'm sad to say that I have a neighbor that is like that. But in the end, I do not see how ecologically, environmentally, that this would benefit this area to have two houses up there, one house up there. It's just not beneficial to the area and to Gerhardt in general. Gerhardt doesn't have a lot of dead end streets. So if you look at the railroad strip where people want to put where Gerhardt wants to put this walk path in, who wants to walk alongside a path that's next to people's houses? I wouldn't want that. And I wouldn't want to live in a house that had a path right next to it where people are traipsing by all day long. That's like living on Front Street on the prom. Okay, I would like the fact that I did go around to all of the neighbors and collected a petition, had a petition signed by not just homeowners, but some renters that are long-term renters. And they're very much against the construction and any of the development on Park Lane that Mr. Pounds and Mrs. Pounds are trying to do. So it's not just me. The whole street is, well, I will say 90% of the street is against this. Because, and you know, you were talking a while back about the CC&Rs only covering 4 houses, that it doesn't pertain all the way down to the end of the street. Well, the house that Mr. and Mrs. Pounds live in, and one other house that actually has an easement off of Highway 101, were never part of Park Lane. The house that faces 101 has the road with an easement that goes down into Mr. and Mrs. Pounds' house. Those were never a Park Lane address. Somehow or another, they acquired Park Lane addresses and became part of the street. So I feel like that you can't just pick and choose what doesn't apply here and what does apply here when they're calling themselves Park Lane and they're not actually Park Lane. They were never part, if you look on the maps, they're never part of Park Lane. They were part of the easement off of the highway. And so, which is why their houses, that house was never included on the petition to sign, because they're not technically part of Park Lane. So
Ms. Parham, excuse me, Ms. Parham, we have a 5-minute time limit for anybody speaking. So I'll give you one more minute to conclude, please.
I would just like to thank you very much for listening to me, for accepting the paperwork that I submitted. And I stand behind everything that I have said in the records that I have given you, and with the signatures of everyone that's on the petition. And thank you for considering my side in this matter.
Thank you.
Maybe ask if there's any other opponents. We have one more phone number that I don't recognize.
Okay. Any more opponents to this partition?
I see none, sir.
Okay. All right, then any neutral comments? Okay.
I'd like to just clarify something with the discussion.
Okay, so there's an opportunity for the applicant to rebut if you choose to.
I would just like to say on behalf of the flooding issue, it absolutely got worse when those 2 lots by Mrs. Parham were purchased and developed. I had been there 2 years already. There was a very small amount of water that would pool up at the end of Park Lane during periods of heavy rain. The first winter after her homes were completed, yes, it was bad. She could not park in her driveway. We had 1.5 to 2 feet of water at the deepest, worst times, right at the base of her driveway, and it crept around my existing little house up into our garage. We freaked out that first winter after their homes were built. We contacted them. We said, what do we do? Is this, you know, from building? I know, it's just.
Well, and I understand, and it sounds like you're making a proposal to improve it for everybody.
We're trying to do the best we know how. And
we did start a proposal, sorry.
Yeah.
Mr. Leonard had seen it. Everyone that drove down has seen that we drug a whole bunch under our house already. We stopped just our foundation. That foundation was there because we were trying to, at our time, build a little home there through Mark. All of us go through the right things. And we did have permission to get those trees down. I did. I just did not go against anything. And it wasn't 25. There was actually, I recall 17. And that's two of them were on our existing property.
Okay. Okay, now I'm looking at my template here again, so bear with me. Continue or close the public hearing. So I guess we're going to close the public hearing.
I'd say one thing. She mentioned that she was concerned about runoff from the houses being built up on the slope, contributing to the runoff and the water going into the area. But if you go back there, she's already building structures in the backyard where she's saying, yeah, if we build, it's going to cause water damage and runoff. But so I don't think that's a really valid thing. It seems like she's contributing to the runoff of excess water, but she's saying that they will be as well. So I don't know.
It's a neighbor, to me, it's a neighborhood problem. Yes, that, you know, if you have the property with the ability to put in the dry well, that's going to solve everybody's problem.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so commission, we're discussing or moving, whichever we choose.
Would you like to close the hearing first? If there's no objections to close the hearing?
Well, okay. Any objections to closing the hearing? No. Giddy up then. Commission discussion or yes, ma'am.
I just have a question that I'm curious about. So if we vote to approve this, do the neighbors have other recourse about this?
Appeal.
Okay.
To the city council, right?
They would appeal to the city council, and that would be an appeal to move on.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, when if whatever we do tonight, there's still a follow-up.
Final plat still coming back, although it would be very narrow review of what the conditions.
Yeah, you would implement, clarify all discussion, and we look at it one more time.
Right.
Okay.
So I just have a comment, I guess. So this is zoned R2.
Yes.
And so it is allowed to create these lots which fit the requirements, right? And we've had a few of these now where neighbor versus neighbor, and that's really just unfortunate. But any neighbor who buys a house on the street can realize that those are potentially buildable lots. Correct? So if one neighbor is allowed to do something, then the other neighbor should be allowed to do it, right? That's the reason to have the zoning.
You're in the city, there's city with lots.
Gotcha.
They have services.
I'm sort of was going to say the same thing. This is the third one we've done. East of the highway seems to be the hotbed now for development because the land is cheaper, the bigger plots they can divide it. That troubles me because I think this is only the beginning and it's going to go on and on. But I support the application because he has met all the criteria. And all I can say is right now you have to win your neighbors over or nobody's wanting to live in those houses that you're going to build. And I've seen that happen. And so you have your work cut out for you, not only building a nice house, but also being a good neighbor, because nobody wants to live in a neighborhood where everybody dislikes you. And that's what you are up against.
I understand.
Okay, any more discussion?
I make a motion we approve it as the comments of amendment.
Second. We have a motion by Terry, second by Don. Okay, so all those in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? None deal.
See you on the final class.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Chad, remember when you told me in training?
We're not quite done yet. Oh, we're not done yet? Oh, look at this. I got you guys. Oh, okay. Any unfinished business?
None.
New business?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Concerns of the commission?
None.
I'm sure you have something.
I will move to adjourn.
No questions for the land use attorney's office. We have a motion to adjourn by Terry. I second. Aye. Aye.
Wow.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.